necessarily to hoard in the way that we might think. Of course, some animals might scurry around and collect a few more nuts and so on, and the bears might fatten up a bit for the winter, but that's a natural process. But the idea of ploughing money into your future, so when you hit 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, you can then stop and you've got enough money to live the life that the way you want to, is a totally false paradigm. And quite frankly, certainly in Britain and in America now, anybody who's kind of under the age of 30 is going to do very well to get any kind of pension whatsoever at all in their life. And so that physical structure, that economic structure, is beginning to fail in that it's not really supportable. And you can look at that in one of two ways. You can think, well, what a terrible thing that is, because, you know, my grandfather retired at 50 and has had a nice chunk of his life with, you know, a decent pension and has been able to travel and do things. And my nephew, say, is not going to be able to enjoy those same things. But on the other hand, it is the universe taking back that and saying, look, this planet is an abundant planet. And the way that abundance works is that it relies totally on an exchange of consciousness. And so if you think that consciousness is kind of like a signal that is transmitted and received and amplified and created throughout the natural world, throughout space, throughout the different star systems, throughout every human, every animal, every plant, every rock, then the more connected you are to that ecosystem, to that ecology of consciousness, the more synchronicity and the more support you are afforded. Now, a normal way of life completely ignores that. It completely and totally rejects that. It discards it as foolishness and as risk, unacceptable risk. So if you've spent 50 years of your life with that mentality, boy, does it take some undoing to start to work backwards from that. Not only to not worry about it, because we're not just talking about ignoring the realities and the responsibilities that we all have, but we're talking about creating that connection with the natural world around us. Because when we become conscious at a high level, which is the normal human path left to our own devices, then the universe can see us. It can actually see us and think, aha, there is a conscious, connected entity who is going about their growth and their unfoldment and their discovery, and who's on their journey. And now I can help them. But it cannot see people who are not conscious. So that lies at the heart of this mystery of how do we resource ourselves when we tread on the spiritual path. We have to do it through knowing that consciousness is the key to bring in those synchronous events, to get in the particular type of resources you need. That happens totally in a two-way fashion. It's not just luck. It's not about getting your special book published. It's not about getting that dream job on that special organic farm somewhere. It's about whatever it is for you, and that changes for everybody. But the key thing is your ability to give in terms of your conscious growth, because that's what the universe wants.
So you're now moving actually into the other side of this equation, which is actually moving through this projection, this control mechanism, and moving into your own awakening process.
Yes, it is. The physical world begins to diminish in accordance and very tightly correlated to the disavowal of our work, of our inner work, of our discovery. And I noticed that the title of the show is Dissolving the Shadow. And the shadow can be likened to Carl Jung's model of the psyche, whereby what we disregard and what we reject becomes our own shadow. And so if there's a part of ourselves that we don't like, our jealousy or our anger or our submissiveness or our anger or whatever it might be, that over time, the further you reject it, the deeper and denser that shadow becomes. Now, I've kind of taken that idea on. I've picked that up, looked at it and thought, this is really interesting. And over time, I have developed that in my own way, whereby the shadow actually isn't just an aspect of mind and isn't just a collective metaphorical or theoretical projection of human consciousness. It's actually a physical thing. And when one disavows one's inner work and one's conscious unfoldment repeatedly, chronically, every time the universe kind of won't let you get away with that. It says, look, you're here for one reason. You're here for discovery. And that discovery infers unfoldment and infers growth and infers risk. And if you reject that discovery, then you begin to create external negative entities that aren't just mental projections. They become actual things, actual concrete things in the world. So a lot of those toxic cultural paradigms that we talk about, a lot of those broken systems in the world and this ridiculous fake democracy that masquerades as administration by the people for the people, which of course we all know is ludicrous and is on a good day is laughable and on a bad day is horrible. But the reason those things exist is because billions of human beings have decided not to make contact with their own discovery, have decided not to live authentically. And so it's a teaching mechanism to say, okay, guys, well, if you want to do that, this is what happens to the physical world. It becomes unpleasant. It becomes darker. And those shadows, far from being just reflections of the mind, actually take on form, and they become people and events and things and emotions, real things. And so it's actually a gift wrapped up in a crisis, really, to say, okay, well, things are bad because so many people are deciding to stay asleep. So some people who that hasn't happened to, who have awakened, they have a responsibility not to wake other people up, because that can only ever be done by oneself, but to make the resources available and the growth available for oneself first and foremost, but also as a support network for the increasing number of people who want to understand what this process is about, who have a notion of what sacred wisdom is, of what philosophy is, of what spirituality is, of what mysticism is, but don't really know where to begin or what to trust or what to have faith in. So those of us who do have some sort of blessing in terms of our insight or our skills or our experiences, we do have an obligation to share that to some extent. And that is why I share what I'm doing, because for a long time I thought, well, why bother? I'll just continue on my own journey. But it became obvious to me that other people do want to hear this and want to share it. So it's very important that we do that.
Absolutely. That's what we're both involved in doing, isn't it? Which is fantastic. So in terms of dissolving the shadow, how do individuals go about that?
Well, the first thing is a realization. Everything begins with a realization. The way we approach dissolution of that shadow is we have to pull ourselves first and foremost away from the material world, however wonderful or rubbish that might be for one person in their life. Some people have exciting, glamorous lifestyles, or so we're told on television, and other people have very mundane and dreary, grim lives. And what spiritual philosophy does is it permits us to rise above the map, the sort of route map or route map of our own life, and take a broader view. And it's a gateway to experiences of insight and of meaning and of truth and of adventure. And for many people, it calibrates the mind for contact with something of a higher order than normal human consciousness. And when we do this, when we take the philosophical view and rise up from the map of our own life and say, well, hang on a second, I know I've got to do X, Y, and Z, but just for a moment, let me rise up and let me take a broader view and let me see a little bit further around the corner and over the valley and behind the mountain and next to what's happening there in that village. I can see further. I rise up. When you do that, you begin to realize what effects one's own negativity or one's own dissolvement has on yourself and on the events and circumstances of your life. And the chief realization is that once you realize that you're able to do that,